Tone, slow, cold, devastating. Every line lands before the next one starts. He stood up at his own son's wedding and said one sentence. One sentence. That stopped the entire ceremony cold. 200 people, candlelight, white flowers everywhere, a pastor at the altar, a bride in her veil, a groom who had never looked more certain of anything in his life, and a father, standing up from the front row, about to destroy all of it. If you marry this woman, you are no longer my son, said out loud, at the altar, in front of everyone. The groom's name was Ethan Calloway. His father, Richard Calloway. Net worth, $1.4 billion. Hotels, real estate, 3 private jets, a family name that had opened every door in that city for 40 years. The bride's name was Simone, 29 years old, single mother. One daughter, 6-year-old Layla, standing right there in her flower girl dress, clutching her basket, watching all of this happen. Simone had worked 2 jobs 18 months ago. She still drove the same 2014 Honda she'd had since college. Richard Calloway called her a mistake. He said it at the rehearsal dinner. He said it in a private call with Ethan the week before. And now he was saying it again, with the pastor 6 feet away, with 200 people watching. But at the back of that room, a door had just opened, quietly, without announcement, without fanfare, and a man had just walked in. Richard Calloway had no idea who that man was. He was about to find out. Stay right there, because what happens next, you will not see coming. Simone Baptiste grew up knowing exactly what it felt like to be underestimated. She was raised in a modest home in Charlotte, North Carolina. Her mother cleaned office buildings overnight, 5 nights a week. For years, her father, and we'll come back to her father, because that detail matters more than anything else in this entire story, her father was simply described by everyone who knew him as a quiet, serious man. A man who worked hard and said very little. Bilious, Simone was the first in her family to go to university. She studied nursing, graduated with honors, got a job at a hospital she loved, and then at 22, she fell in love with someone who wasn't ready. And at 23, she became a mother. Alone. She didn't fall apart. She reorganized. She picked up weekend shifts, found a daycare on a Tuesday-Wednesday rotation she could afford, packed Layla's lunches the night before, every night, without exception, read to her daughter every single evening, no matter how tired, no matter what shift she'd just come off. She was not a woman who waited to be rescued. She was a woman who built the ladder herself, one rung at a time. Ethan Calloway met her at a hospital fundraiser 3 years ago. He had been dragged there by a colleague. He was bored. He was nursing a glass of sparkling water by the back wall when a woman in a blue dress walked past him, balancing a tray of donated auction items, and said, without even looking at him, "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." He laughed. For the first time all evening, they talked for 2 hours. He called her the next day, and the day after that. And within 6 months, Ethan Calloway, heir to the Calloway Group, educated at Oxford, expected to marry within a very specific tax bracket, was completely, irreversibly in love, good single mother from Charlotte who drove a 2014 Honda and packed her daughter's lunch every night without exception. He proposed after 18 months. She said yes immediately. Layla asked if she could be the flower girl. Richard Calloway found out about Simone 4 months into their relationship. His response was swift, surgical. He hired someone to pull a background report, reviewed her finances, looked at her address and her car and her employment history, and formed a conclusion he never once questioned. He called Ethan into his office. "She's not for you," Richard said. "She's a distraction. End it." Ethan didn't end it. The conversations that followed over the next 14 months, they were not conversations. They were ultimatums, delivered in different rooms at different volumes, always with the same message underneath. Your family, or her. Ethan chose her, every single time. And here is the detail that changes everything. What Richard Calloway never did, in 4 months of surveillance and 14 months of pressure, was ask a single question about who Simone Baptiste actually was, where she came from, who raised her, who her father was. He never asked. That was his first mistake. And now Richard was standing at his son's wedding, delivering his final ultimatum in public, in front of 200 people, in front of the pastor, and a man who had just walked quietly through the back door of that room. Nobody had told Richard Calloway who Simone's father was, and in about 4 minutes, that omission was going to change everything. Richard Calloway was still standing. 200 guests had turned to stone. The pastor had taken one quiet step back, the way experienced men of God do when they recognize that what's happening is no longer in their jurisdiction. Ethan stared at his father. His hands, which had been shaking, went still. "Dad," he said, low, steady, "sit down." I will not sit down, Richard said. His voice carried the particular authority of a man who had never in his adult life been told to sit down, and meant it. I've told you what I've told you, Ethan. This is your last opportunity to make the right decision. The right decision. Ethan turned back to Simone. He took both her hands. I'm sorry, he said quietly, not to his father. To her? Don't be, she said, and she meant it. Ethan turned back to his father. Then I guess I'm no longer your son, he said, because I'm marrying her today. The room exhaled. Someone in the middle rows started crying. A woman near the front grabbed her husband's arm. Layla, 6 years old, flower basket in both hands, looked between the tall, angry man and her mother, then back at the tall, angry man. With the particular fearlessness that only 6-year-olds and people who's already lost everything can carry, Richard Calloway's face went through several things in rapid succession. Shock, fury, something that might have been the very beginning of doubt, gone before it could form. He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope, set it on the nearest chair. The lawyers will be in contact Monday, he said, and he turned to leave. That was when the door at the back of the room opened. The entire room turned. Every head, every pair of eyes, toward the back. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. On screen, he didn't know who was about to walk in. The man who walked in was in his early 60s. Tall, silver at the temples. A dark suit that fit perfectly, not flashy, not corporate, simply correct. He moved without hurry. He acknowledged nobody as he walked. He had the particular quality of a person who has never once needed to announce himself, because rooms have always simply adjusted to his presence. His name was Dr. Emmanuel Baptiste, and the moment Richard Calloway turned and saw his face, the color left Richard Calloway's body, because Richard Calloway knew that face. He knew it from boardrooms, from the covers of financial publications, from the guest list of the state governor's annual dinner, where the two of them had been seated at the same table 3 years ago, and Richard had spent 20 minutes describing his family's investment philosophy to a man who had nodded politely and said very little. Dr. Emmanuel Baptiste, founder of the Baptiste Medical Group, owner of 19 private healthcare facilities across 7 states, personal net worth, approximately $2.3 billion. Simone's father. Richard opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Dr. Baptiste reached the front of the room. He stopped beside his daughter. He looked at her. Not at Richard, not at Ethan, at Simone, and he smiled. The smile of a father who drove 4 hours and arrived 3 minutes late because his flight was delayed and had called ahead to ask them to stall. Sorry I'm late, sweetheart, he said. And that was when Simone cried. Not from the ultimatum, not from 14 months of pressure, not from 200 people watching her almost marriage almost fall apart. From her father walking through that door. Dr. Baptiste turned to Richard Calloway. The two men looked at each other. Richard, Dr. Baptiste said, calm, warm even. The warmth of a man who had absolutely nothing to prove. Richard's mouth was still not producing words. I believe you were leaving, Dr. Baptiste said, gently, precisely, like setting down a very expensive piece of china. Richard Calloway did not leave. He sat down, not in his front row seat, in the nearest chair, the one where he'd placed the lawyer's envelope, as if his legs had simply made the decision without consulting him. He sat there, and he looked at his son, at Simone, at the little girl with the flower basket who was now watching him with enormous eyes, and at Emmanuel Baptiste, who had pulled up a chair beside his daughter and was holding her hand, as naturally as breathing. Ethan watched his father. He had never seen his father sit like that, shoulders forward, hands open in his lap, the posture of a man whose certainty has been physically removed. Dad, Ethan said, quietly. Richard looked up. She never told me, Richard said, the first honest sentence he'd said all day. She never said who her father. I know, Ethan said. She didn't tell you because it shouldn't matter, and she wanted to see if it did. Richard looked at Simone. A long moment. I owe you an apology, he said. Simone held his gaze. Yes, she said. You do. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And then Layla, 6 years old, completely unbothered by everything that had just happened, walked up to Richard Calloway with her flower basket and held it out to him. A flower. No explanation. Just a flower. From a child to a man being dismantled by his own prejudice. Richard Calloway took the flower, and for the first time in this entire story, he had no words at all. The ceremony continued. The pastor, who had been waiting with the particular patience of a man who has genuinely seen everything, stepped forward, and simply said, shall we? And they did. Ethan and Simone were married at 4:47 in the afternoon. Layla stood between them the entire time. At one point she held both their hands. Nobody had asked her to. She just did. The reception went late. Emmanuel Baptiste gave a toast that people still talk about. Short, specific, and ending with this. The quality of a person is not measured by what they own. It is measured by what they give when they have nothing left to give. My daughter has given everything. To everyone. Her entire life. 7. She is the wealthiest person in this room. Richard Calloway was seated at a table near the back. He did not leave during the toast. He listened. He stayed for the entire reception. In the months that followed, the changes were not dramatic, not announced. They were quiet. The kind of changes that happen when a person is genuinely reckoning with something for the first time. Richard called Ethan 2 weeks after the wedding, asked if he could take the family to dinner. Ethan checked with Simone. Simone said yes. They met at a restaurant Richard chose, the kind of place where he always took people he wanted to impress. Simone arrived in her 2014 Honda. She didn't apologize for it. Over dinner, Richard asked Simone questions. Real ones. About nursing. About Layla. About Charlotte. About her mother. And he listened in a way he had not listened in a very long time. At the end of the evening, when they were leaving, Layla took Richard's hand in the parking lot without being asked, the same way she'd offered him the flower, and walked with him to the car. Richard looked down at her. She looked up at him. Are you Daddy's daddy? She asked. I am, he said. Okay, she said, and let go of his hand and ran ahead to the car. Richard stood in that parking lot for a moment, watching her run, processing something that had no name yet, but was changing him regardless. The lawyer's letter was never sent. The disinheritance was never filed. 3 months later, Ethan rejoined the Calloway group, not because his father insisted, because Simone told him his father was trying, and trying deserved a chance. Some people change too late. Richard Calloway changed just in time, and the last image of this story, Ethan and Simone at a family dinner table, Richard at the head, Emmanuel Baptiste across from him, and Layla sitting between her 2 grandfathers, passing the breadbasket. Everything that was almost destroyed, sitting together, in the warmth of one ordinary evening. That's the whole story, and it's enough. After everything Richard Calloway put that family through, the ultimatums, the surveillance, the lawyer's envelope placed on a wedding chair like a threat dressed in paper, the thing that finally cracked him open wasn't a confrontation, wasn't a revelation. It was a 6-year-old girl handing him a flower, and I keep thinking about that. So here's what I want to ask you, and I mean this genuinely. Has someone ever judged you, or someone you love, based on completely the wrong thing, and did they ever come around? What changed them? Tell me in the comments. Because I think this is one of those questions where everybody has an answer, and every answer matters. If stories about real love, real families, and real people choosing to be better, even when it's hard, even when it's late, are what you come here for, subscribe. That is exactly what this channel is built to find. And next time, a professor failed the same student 3 years in a row. That student just bought the university. The meeting they had last month left the whole faculty speechless. Stay close.